Malaysian students have fared poorly in international testing.
I would certainly say that our education system is underperforming.
Vietnam is far in front of us, especially in terms of maths, English, and also in reading. So we are far behind.
Now, there are growing calls for a revamp of Malaysia's education system.
But the problem is not whether we can or not, but what should we do in order to improve that?
But why has education reform in Malaysia proven so difficult?
Malaysia has a tendency of changing policies instead of improving the implementation.
They have to take politics out of education. Ministers have to not focus too much on leaving legacies.
Well, I think if Anwar changes the policy of the school from Bahasa Melayu to Bahasa Inggeris, he will be out of office next week.
This January, in front of a gathered crowd at the University of Malaya, Malaysia's Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, spoke about the state of Malaysia's education.
Among the seven ASEAN countries, you are the worst off. Why is it we have failed in the score? And these are questions that we must ask before we embark on discussing the future. We must know the state of our affairs and cannot be in the state of denial.
What prompted Prime Minister Anwar's remarks were Malaysia's poor performance in 2022's PISA scores. PISA stands for Programme for International Student Assessment. It is an international test administered by the OECD. It evaluates 15-year-old students' proficiency in subjects like mathematics, science, and reading as a gauge of a country's education system. The PISA is conducted once every 3 years.
We did decide that we wanted a target, and the target was that we wanted to be top third in the PISA by 2025. I think it was in 2018 that we managed to move up from bottom third to middle third of the layer. But the last time, 2022 PISA, and which were released, results were released in 2024, we actually fell back to the bottom third.
Malaysia's score for mathematics fell from 414 in 2018 to 409, a drop of 31 points. In other core subjects, the scores for 2022 also declined compared to 2018, 22 points for science and 27 points for reading. Among all ASEAN countries tested, Malaysia took a fourth spot behind Brunei, Vietnam and Singapore in the average PISA scores. But what stands out is that Malaysia recorded the most significant drop in scores. The Education Ministry attributed the decline to the COVID pandemic, when schooling was disrupted by lockdown measures.
So in the PISA report particularly, Malaysia actually have a decline by 27 points. Now, Ministry of Education will say everybody declined, that is true, but the average decline is 10 points. So we are almost 3 times of that.
Everyone went through COVID, and we did expect a reduction in the assessments. But what shocked us was that despite all that, Vietnam and Cambodia actually improved their ranking.
It's a long process and long preparation by Vietnam to look at their educational reform seriously. So it started by imposing the Resolution 29 about more than 10 years ago. So they put 2 emphases. First is about the teachers' competencies, and second is also their openness to be evaluated against international assessment like PISA. So they prepare a very long-term plan to close the gap between their own education system with the rest of the world. And now they are reaping the rewards.
Malaysia too embarked on a similar education reform program a decade ago. In 2013, the government published the Malaysian Education Blueprint. The report pointed out that Malaysia spent comparatively more on education than its peers, yet achieved poorer results. So, the blueprint focused on improving proficiencies in English, math, and science. The goal is for Malaysian workers to be more competitive internationally.
We are getting foreign investment, and they are in areas that are related to technology and STEM and data science and chips manufacturing and so on. And we need to deliver in terms of the skills that these investors are interested in. And the solution, to me, starts at the primary school.
The 2013 blueprint recommended various measures to improve education outcomes. Yet, why has Malaysia's PISA scores fallen, despite the decade-long reform?
If you read the policies, they were beautiful, okay, written nicely. But if you go to the classrooms and you compare to what's written in the policy, 60-70% of it is not what has been written, right? So because of that, implementation is poor.
Shanaz and her organisation, LEAP Services, help teachers and schools adopt the effective teaching practices.
If you look at teachers training, they are taught about how to actually, get students to be participative, get students to, make it more fun and all that. But if you go to classroom, they don't do any of that. Right. So there's really a wide gap between what we think is being done and what's actually being done.
The 2013 Education Blueprint suggested ways to improve teaching quality. It outlined plans to recruit teachers only from top graduates and to implement competency and performance-based career progression. Nur Azima once sat in the National Education Advisory Council.
One of the recommendations of the World Bank was that teacher evaluation should be benchmarked to international standards. So right now, when you don't do that, teachers rate themselves very high and continue to do so. But when you get the inspectors to rate teachers, the results are the reverse. They're not as good as they think they are. Vietnam, the teachers are given support and the teachers set their own targets. And if the teachers don't meet their own targets, they exited from the system. In our case, you probably are given targets to meet and the support. But if you don't meet the targets, we just continue.
Others point to the abolition of the UPSR, or the Primary School Achievement Test. UPSR is a national examination taken by students at the end of Primary 6. The exam was abolished in April 2021 during the Perikatan Nasional Government led by former Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin. It was replaced with school-based and class-based assessments.
The students have lost their interest and even motivation because they know that there's no exam, there's no point for them to study.
They did that abruptly without putting all this alternative in place, without preparing an adequate ecosystem that allow students' quality not to be compromised and teachers' focus not to be jeopardized. It's very unfortunate.
Now, as the alarm grows over Malaysia's dipping educational performance, the picture is even bleaker among the poor. Education outcomes are worse among those of lower socio-economic status. In Malaysia, this group is known as B40, named for the bottom 40%.
Boleh eja ayam? Eja saya boleh? Tak boleh juga. Buku? Macam mana eja buku? Tak boleh juga.
Eight-year-old Noor Iliana Sofia is now in primary 2. But even at that age, she struggles with basic literacy.
Masih belum boleh membaca lagi ayat-ayat yang singkat, ayat yang ringkas, dan penggunaan ayat pun tidak terlampau banyak.
Sophia comes from a disadvantaged background. Her mum passed away 2 years ago from an illness. Since then, she's been under the care of her grandmother, 76-year-old Saira Kidom. Unfortunately, Saira is unable to help her granddaughter catch up with her schoolwork due to her own limited education.
So kakak dia tengok ada homework tak apa, kadang-kadang boleh tanya kenapa tak buat, lupalah apalah. Macam itulah, itu je lah masalahnya.
To help alleviate the family's financial strain and address Sophia's education needs, an NGO called Child Kid Foundation has stepped in to help.
Jadi kanak-kanak yang sebegini kebiasaannya akan menghadapi pelbagai masalah di sekolah. Jadi apa yang selalu kita akan lakukan adalah bekerjasama dengan pusat tuition dan sebagainya, dan supaya mereka juga boleh belajar di rumah dengan bantuan keluarga, supaya kanak-kanak ni boleh mengejar balik apa yang mereka tertinggal.
Prime Minister Anwar is once again calling for a revamp of Malaysia's education system. Yet, many competing ideologies could stand in the way of reform. "16-year-olds Goh Meng Yu and Celine Hu have been friends for many years. Their bond began about a decade ago when they were both enrolled in the same vernacular Chinese primary school.
I was 7, so I knew I was going to school, but I didn't have any opinions about what school I was supposed to go.
I been to a Chinese school already, so when they say they'll send me to a Chinese school again, I'm like, okay.
Malaysia's national school systems at the primary level are divided into national and vernacular schools. Vernacular schools use either Chinese or Tamil language as the teaching medium. Malay, on the other hand, is primarily used in all national Malay primary schools. However, many parents and students in Malaysia believe that vernacular schools are more academically rigorous.
Chinese schools are very competitive. They just want the best for students, and they just want us to be the best. That's why they're giving us so many exercises, so many practices to do, so we can improve on ourselves. Because their mindset is practice makes perfect.
If you're talking about amount of homework, amount of tests, I think those are actually challenges that we as the working people are encountering every day as well.
Since their establishment in the early 19th century, Chinese vernacular schools were predominantly attended by Chinese students.
So to me, the main thing is that I just want them to go to a place where they are learning, and the language, so language is very important as well.
But these days, more Malay parents are choosing private or Chinese vernacular schools over national schools. In 2024, Bumiputras made up over 18% of the students in the country's 1,299 Chinese primary schools, compared to 9.5% in 2010. The number of ethnic Indians studying in Chinese language primary schools has also risen, from 1.67% a decade ago to 2.75% in 2020. Dr. Nurul Ferdowsi and her husband, Dr. Idris Sharom, chose to enroll their 2 children in a Chinese vernacular school.
We want to give something like added value to our children and something new, which is Chinese language.
I see that they have better training or more homework, or they are better in maths, especially mathematics. My first son, Umar, mathematics, he gets 100 marks for in standard 6, learning it in Chinese.
Omar is now 13 years old. He's in Form 1 at a Catholic secondary school, after spending 6 years in a vernacular primary school.
我的朋友全部都是没有分，好像他是华人，然后他要跟华人做朋友不了啊。他跟马来人也是要做朋友啊，所以我喜欢在华校读书。
Then there is also the perception that vernacular schools have better facilities than some national schools.
You know, you walk into a national school, some are so dilapidated. You walk into a Chinese school, you think you're walking into an international school because Chinese parents are willing to pay for education.
Despite their growing popularity, vernacular schools are not without controversy in Malaysia. Last year, former Premier Dr. Mahathir Mohamad said vernacular schools caused racial divide and should be abolished. Two NGOs also challenged the legality of vernacular schools, citing that all official matters should be conducted in Malay, according to the federal constitution. The courts struck this down in February, ruling that vernacular schools were constitutional. The debate around vernacular schools is one of several contentious issues surrounding education policy in Malaysia. Anwar Ibrahim sent his children to national schools back in the 1980s.
I just didn't want my children to not know their roots. You know, I could have sent them to better quality school, even though that would have meant spending more money, but I chose not to.
Today, all his children are abroad, pursuing PhDs in the UK and the US. Anwar himself is passionate about educational issues in Malaysia. He is a regular contributor to Free Malaysia Today, or FMT, an independent bilingual news portal. He has written about another hot topic in Malaysia's education policy: religion.
I think it's becoming much more focused on Islam over the years. It has always been there. It has always been something that you learn in school, and we even have a parallel religious education school. I think it is something that is an inevitable conclusion of having a highly political education system and a highly political bureaucracy and theocracy that keeps pushing it.
According to some reports, 16% of curriculum hours are dedicated to religious education, compared to 12% for mathematics, 7% for science, and 7% for arts at the primary level.
If you compare periods of religious studies and science and math, it's significantly more. So how, yet we are saying, how is it that our students are not interested in STEM subjects? How can they be interested when there isn't enough time for the subjects?
The teachers were complaining, you see, they hardly can do like a project with the student because of the limited time. So they keep on asking that maybe putting science and maths, they should given more, you know, compared to the other subject.
The influence of Islam in national schools emerged in the 1980s. It coincided with the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, which led to the revival of Islam in the Muslim world. Islamic curriculum was expanded in the mid-2000s. And from then on, school hours devoted to the teaching of the religion increased progressively.
Once you add on the Arabic, you add on Al-Quran and what have you, it can come up to as many as 11 periods a week. And this is one of the things that drives non-Muslims away from national schools, because when the Muslim students have Pendidikan Islam, which is 11 periods a week, the non-Muslims also have to have 11 periods of moral, and most of the time they don't learn anything.
And I do believe that there are too many religious classes in school. I'm not saying cut down and don't teach your children religion, but what I am saying is it's not the responsibility of the schools. Take that some of that responsibility out of the schools and put it back in the home. When the religious classes are run, what happens to the non-Muslims? They are segregated. This is very bad.
In 2018, during the Pakatan Harapan government's first term in charge, they attempted to reduce the number of hours devoted to religious education. Dr. Mazli Malik was the education minister at that time.
Some of the subjects we did propose should be taught outside the schooling hours, but still at the school, as a supplementary, just like any other subjects being taught in developed countries. We did make some adjustment, but I don't know what happened to it.
We have the ideas, the good ideas and the good analysis as to what is happening, but when it comes to the political will, for instance, to tackle the problem of too many religious classes in schools, for instance, it seems the administrations, all of them, not just this one, the current one, are reluctant.
Last year, the government of Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim instead announced plans to introduce a new Islamic module in public schools. The new module will focus on the teaching of 40 hadiths, or sayings of Prophet Muhammad.
That was a response towards the rising of extremism and radicalization amongst the popular conservative culture amongst Malay Muslims in Malaysia. So I think the Prime Minister and also the Minister of Education, who's executing the wish of the Prime Minister then, was trying to expose Muslim students to that 40 hadiths, because that sayings of the Prophet are teaching Muslims to be moderate, to be more considerable, rather than adopting certain radical extremist elements that have been taken out of context.
Some, however, believe this move is aimed at winning the support of the Malay Muslim voters. At the 15th general elections, Pakatan Harapan picked up an estimated 13% of Malay votes. United Malay's National Organisation, or UMNO, received 32%. These two coalitions would eventually form the government. The opposition coalition, Perikatan Nasional, or PN, garnered a majority of the Malay votes at 54%. Apart from religion, the language of instruction is another area of debate. An ongoing tussle on whether math and science should be taught in English or Malay.
British had English medium schools, right? But after May 1969, the Prime Minister at the time, Tun Abdul Razak, decided that we needed a Malaysian identity. We didn't have one. So in January 1970, it started the Malay medium schools, and I think gradually it became totally Malay medium.
In 2003, then Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad introduced the use of English to teach math and science. It was done amid concerns over the poor standard of English among Malaysians. But by 2012, then Education Minister Muhyiddin Yassin abandoned the experiment due to the shortage of teachers qualified to teach in English. There were also concerns that the dominance of English would undermine the students' grasp of the national language. Later, this was reversed in 2016, when the dual language program was introduced in some schools, allowing students to choose their preferred instruction medium, Malay or English. The policy flip-flops, however, have caused confusion.
Then we now have teachers who are taught in English, but now have to teach in Bahasa Malaysia. Okay, so this is poor implementation again, I'll be honest. But the flip-flopping in itself, I think, is really a problem, especially for the students.
I think we need to pick one language and stick with it and see the sort of the entire generation go through that.
With politics infusing shifting education policies, one Malaysian state has gone its own way. Has it been successful? "17-year-old Zoe Koti is in her final year at Lodge Secondary School, one of the top private schools in Sarawak. The school primarily uses Malay as the medium of instruction for Malay, history and moral education. Other subjects are taught in English.
I think especially like science and math subjects are in English, right? If they were in Malay, I would probably struggle a little bit more. I'll probably have to be searching up the meanings every now and then to know what's happened, like understand the topic better. Whereas now I'm learning in English, I just have to understand the concept because I don't have problems understanding the sentences.
Private schools in Malaysia cost more, 2,000 Malaysian ringgit or $416 per semester compared to free education provided by the national schools. Zoe's mum, 44-year-old Chu Yi, however, feels the investment is worth it. She herself went to Malay primary and secondary schools in Sarawak.
During my time, there's no problem for us because we learn everything in Bahasa. But now I think it's very important to learn maths and science in English. Because when you go uni, everything switch to English. It's very struggle for me. Because we need to learn all the words again.
Private schools also benefit from smaller class sizes. They have an average class size of 25 students, sometimes going as low as 10 to 15 students a class. Public schools have an average class size of 31.
Private school have less students. Less students, the teacher can concentrate more on the student one by one. Unlike the government school, right, the one class at 40 to 50 people is too many students, they cannot concentrate on each student.
In government schools, because they have so many students, it's often very hard to control that many students. Whereas in private school, we have less students, so it's more easier to control and keep everyone regulated.
While the rest of the states in the peninsula are debating the medium of instruction, Sarawak has moved ahead. Since 2020, all primary school students in the state taught math and science classes in English. And from 2026 onwards, secondary schools in the state will follow suit. This was made possible by a deal between the Sarawak state and the federal governments under the Malaysia Agreement known as MA63. According to the agreement, the states of Sabah and Sarawak have some autonomy over things like educational policies. And so, leveraging the dual language program, some secondary schools, like Lodge National, have adopted English for teaching.
Leadership that the student body will have at our school.
Our focus has been heavily on English, and that is where we groom our kids from young. So we do have good results in our sciences and maths and STEM, yes. At national level, we have done quite well. The Lodge group of schools have done, we are quite proud of the performance of our students actually. For the past few years, for all these years actually. So it's tough actually to maintain that standard that we have.
I mentioned that we look at it in due respect for science.
Linus Lee has been teaching mathematics for the last 20 years.
The advantage of teaching in English is such that sometimes if you are looking for materials online, they are readily available. Most materials are easily accessible in the internet, or for that matter, any other books. For modern students, I think most of them can speak English really well. So learning mathematics in English is actually an easy thing for most of them.
Sarawak knows the importance of DLP, and Sarawak is really capitalizing on MA63. It put in 18 million ringgit of its own money, state funds, and decided to do 100% DLP in all schools. So all their, I think, 1,248 schools starting from Standard 1 in 2020 are all completely in English. So now it's 2004, so they've been doing it for 5 years already, you know. So they know the benefit of it.
Another move that's being contemplated by the state authority is the reinstatement of an assessment examination program for students at the end of their primary 6 education. This is to replace the UPSR examination, which was abolished across the country in 2021.
Lately, I think the Minister for the Ministry for Innovation and Talent Development, Dato' Sri Roland Saga, he said that Sarawak will have our own assessment after their year 6, those doing the LP program, dual language program. They mean teaching maths and science in English. The focusing is more on STEM. Once we got the result, the data and all that, and then it will help us to improve.
While Sarawak is advancing its educational reforms, the peninsula is still grappling with the perennial language issues. In 2023, only about a quarter of around 10,000 schools nationwide adopted the DLP. A lion's share of these is in Sarawak.
If you take Sarawak away and you just look at primary schools in Peninsula and Sabah, only 10% of primary schools offer DLP. And in most cases, only one class. So to me, that's a fail on the part of the Ministry of Education. I think when we came up with DLP, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the target was 5,000 schools should be offering DLP by 2025. They've definitely failed.
Instead, now there appears to be a rollback of DLP guidelines. Under the new DLP conditions released in March this year, one math or science class must be conducted in Malay or Bahasa Melayu. Previously, there were no such restrictions. According to media reports, this has led to pushback from parents and schools.
I think many school boards disagree, and I still continue to engage with the ministry to say that why, right? What for, right? I mean, just let the school decide. If there is really one class of students that would like to have the class in Malay, then we just open one class. But if there's none, then let's just let the school decide to have everything in English, all classes in English.
Well, I would say very confusing, very frustrating. In fact, I would say parents are very much in favor of sticking to the policy of at least science and mathematics in English. The dual language program is also very much, the parents are very much in favor of that.
70-year-old retired teacher Chan Xiao Chi previously worked at a national Malay school for 32 years. She taught math and science and witnessed how changing the medium of instruction impacted students.
Back in 2002, before that, I conduct classes using BM. So science is in BM, the word nutrition is nutrisi. Then after that, we change into English. Then the nutrition is here. So what the children need to do is they have to change their command of English. So if they are unable to read English, then the understanding of science will be affected. You switch so often, that's why the performance is not good. You know this why is it now the trend is everybody don't trust government school. They all go to private international school because they keep changing, and then teachers are not competent enough to teach in the relevant subject.
The first time I was teaching with him, I came back from the United States. I was asked to speak, to teach in Malay. Okay, and it was not that difficult a transition, but then I had to learn all these terms in architecture in Malay, and then suddenly they come in and say, we have to do it in English now. Okay, why? I said, we are in a complete mess. I would have preferred that we go English, but then I would be accused of being unpatriotic and also not loyal to Malay.
The flip-flop around medium of instruction points to the heart of why education reform in Malaysia is difficult: the politicization of education.
They have to take politics out of education. Ministers have to not focus too much on leaving legacies. And if there's a good thing going, like the DLP, reinforce it.
Well, I think if Anwar changes the policy of the school from Bahasa Melayu to Bahasa Inggeris, he will be out of office next week. Okay? Because the Perikatan Nasional will come in with UMNO people, and I understand enough politics to know that will happen. Okay? That is how dangerous this issue of religion, Islam, which is Islam, and the issue of Bahasa Malaysia in the school.
My perception or my deconstruction of the situation is that Anwar is in a very difficult position right now. He's trying his best, but at the same time, this lack of political will has been happening for different administrations prior to the current administration. So it's not a matter of who is in power or which political party is in power. It's a matter of probably our political culture.
While debate around long-standing issues like language and religion remain, the government has looked at other areas for reform. What is being done to lift Malaysian students? In one corner of the room here at the Chowkit Foundation, Sophia appears deeply absorbed in her book. But a closer look reveals that it's not the text that captures her attention, but the pictures. At 8 years old, she still struggles with her reading and writing. One of the key factors which have contributed to Sophia's slow progress is that she did not have the opportunity to attend preschool. Her parents failed to obtain her birth certificate after she was born. As a result, she faced a lot of challenges gaining admission to a preschool after she turned 5, which has set her back.
Kalau 1 tambah 1 tu berapa?
2.
2. Mengira kalau tambah Sophia boleh lah. Kalau 1 kali 1, tahu tak?
Tak tahu.
Access to preschool education is one area the government is working on. Preschool enrollment in Malaysia is around 80%. The target is 90%. There are various reasons why some miss out on early childhood education.
Di antaranya adalah faktor keuangan dan ada juga dari segi dokumentasi macam saya maklumkan seperti kes Sophia, ada yang mungkin dari segi transportationnya, dari segi kesedaran ibu bapa itu sendiri, kecukupan untuk keluarga itu tidak cukup untuk mereka meneruskan kehidupan, jadi mereka mengambil pendekatan tak apalah masuk terus ke darjah 1. Kan nak pergi tadika yang swasta mahal, kalau nak pergi ke tadika yang kerajaan tempatnya adalah terhad, bukan semua orang akan dapat masuk sebabkan ada pendaftaran yang panjang, jadi ada pemilihan.
According to the World Bank report on education, Bending Bamboo Shoots, almost a quarter of Malaysian children who begin primary school lack essential school readiness skills. About 4 in 10 have failed to achieve reading proficiency by the end of Standard 5, or the age of 11. The problem is more acute among children from lower income families, with 61% falling below reading proficiency levels. And so, the World Bank recommends improving preschool education as part of reforms.
Lagi satu, sekiranya mereka tidak didedahkan dengan alam persekolahan macam di preschool kan, di prasekolah, mereka tidak ada pendedahan dari segi pergaulan dan sebagainya. Kita boleh tengok macam kes Sophia, mungkin dari segi pergaulannya kurang kan, hanya pergaulan beberapa jam saja di sekolah sampai pukul 12. Jadi dari segi communicationnya dan sebagainya agak terbantu sedikit kan. Jadi perkara-perkara begini sebenarnya dia memberi efek dari segi keyakinan diri, macam mana nak bercakap dengan orang, rasa takut dan sebagainya.
29-year-old Nur Fatia Johari runs a kindergarten set up by her parents nearly 20 years ago. Currently, her school has 150 students.
Preschool is very important as a space that children can learn in a controlled manner. By the time the children graduate from the school, they will be able to read, write, because in Malaysia we use the 4M. So I'd say the terms in Malay, membaca, menulis, mengira and mengaku. which means they can count and they can also deduct and subtract everything.
According to UNICEF, children who miss preschool were twice as likely not to be on track in terms of reading and numeracy compared to their peers.
If you didn't attend kindergarten, so they will left out it. So these are the group that will be the dropout. So what the government should do is must make kindergarten compulsory and free.
There are around 2.35 million Malaysian children under the age of 5. Meanwhile, there are around 16,700 government and 9,100 private preschools in the country. This number is not nearly enough to meet the country's needs, according to experts. So, the Education Ministry is now looking to expand preschools with all teacher education institutes, vocational colleges and secondary schools to provide preschool premises.
We are in the process of making it compulsory. Yeah, I think it's a process that we are going through. And just to add on, some say it's like preschool education too expensive in Malaysia. Just for information, we have the public preschool programs, which only like cost about $5 a month, which includes 2 meals a day. So it's heavily subsidized. So except for a very extreme rural case, I think most of the children actually they have the opportunities to enter kindergarten or preschool, with the exception of negligent parents. Maybe they don't send.
The World Bank report also identified another problem: the lack of teacher preparedness and effective performance tracking systems.
You know, we have a serious problem with discipline in the schools.
The absenteeism of teachers remain an issue, which is like ridiculous. In other countries, those teachers would have been sacked long time ago. But we are grappling with this issue and yet still finding solutions on it.
According to Tiada Guru, an NGO in Sabah, almost 1 in 5 Malaysian school principals have reported teacher absenteeism. Between 2010 and 2017, just over half of disciplinary cases heard by the Ministry of Education involved teachers being absent from duty. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim recently warned that teachers who are negligent, undisciplined and perform poorly will not receive automatic grade promotions under the time-based system.
So I would attribute this to a problem of the civil service mentality, that you are guaranteed your promotion whether or not you put in quality work. So on the one hand, I would say yes, I agree with that. No two ways about non-performing or underperforming teachers. At the same time, they have to be evaluated transparently and efficiently.
Personally, actually, I believe that generally, again, this is not specific to Malaysia, we are having a motivational gap. People generally are not motivated to do the difficult things, to learn things and work hard. We need quality teachers who bring these subjects to life and to bring the interest in students into these subjects.
At the same time, surveys of teachers say they are overburdened with administrative and non-teaching duties.
I'm very conscious about teachers' welfare. I work with a lot of teachers, and because they're also human beings. So for them to make this transformation, they actually need support.
We need to also support them to articulate and find their sense of purpose. Because how can they help our kids find their purpose if they themselves were not sure why they are doing what they are doing?
For Malaysia, the stakes are high. The country wants to achieve high technology status by 2030, becoming a regional IT powerhouse. It has secured investments from the likes of Tesla and Intel. But according to the Prime Minister, Malaysia is facing the shortage of some 30,000 engineers in the country. And the weakness in math, science and English scores do not bode well for its tech ambitions.
We have set ourselves a target. We wanted 60% of students to be in science stream and 40% in the arts. But right now we're only about 40% in science. So I think no matter what we do, we seem to be stagnant. We want our children to be ready for those jobs. What's the use of having all these investments when employees are brought in from investor countries and we're not benefiting from it? So it doesn't make sense. So we must benefit from it.
Meanwhile, the Education Ministry has begun a syllabus review in 2022, with a new curriculum to be implemented in 2027.
I think many curriculums are also undergoing review. At the same time, we also introduced the KBAT. KBAT means higher order level of thinking skills, so that we can equip our children earlier to prepare them for the more sophisticated maths or science challenges. Apart from that, I think the Minister, Fadlina, also mentioned a few times that we'll put a lot more emphasis on STEM education. So all these are on the table. The challenges are, I think, first, the cultural shift that is needed, I think, from the society. And second is, of course, again, the implementation. Because plan is easy, but to implement them requires a lot of mid-level commitment from the mid-level management or bureaucrats.
In the end, while the PISA scores are just one metric to measure the state of Malaysia's student performance, it might be the spark needed to long-term education reform.
This is an opportunity. I think we've looked at the data, we've acknowledged where we are. Now it's time for us to come up with some clear policy direction and stick with it. Because the key thing is, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I think changing policy halfway through will not help.
There is a proverb that says it takes 10 years to grow a tree, but it takes 100 years to enrich a person, or to enrich our education system. So of course it won't take 100 years, but to me, at the minimum, we are looking at the next 5 to 10 years. Unfortunately, because education, the lagging effect will be there. Today you implement a policy, you only see results in the next 5 years. So it's important, again, to have a continuation of the policy. Shouldn't flip-flop easily.
I would be elated and jump for joy if after 20 years, I see a great improvement. In 20 years, I'll be 81 years old, okay? If I'm still alive by then and I can see a big improvement, an upward trajectory all the way, and I can interact with the younger people and see a difference in that interaction, I'll be happy. I'm not going to be happy just because of some PISA score.